The plane's engines hummed softly, a rhythmic sound that mixed with the faint chatter of passengers and the rustle of seatbelts being fastened. It was Flight 602 from Los Angeles to New York, a routine red-eye flight that most people boarded half asleep, eager to rest through the cross-country trip. In row 12, Seat A, sat Drive, Emily Carter, a woman in her early 30s with calm eyes and a quiet presence. To anyone looking, she was just another exhausted traveler, headphones in, travel pillow behind her neck, hoodie pulled tight to shut out the world. No one could guess that 5 years ago, she had been a U.S. Air Force pilot, flying military jets at supersonic speed. But after a tragic mission that ended in the loss of a close friend, Emily had walked away from the sky for good. Now, she worked as an aerospace engineer, designing planes she'd never fly. She closed her eyes, thinking she might actually sleep this time. Her mind drifted between the vibration of the engines and memories she tried to suppress, runway lights, cockpit alarms, her commander's last words. But the memories faded as the plane took off smoothly. The city lights below shrank to dots, and soon there was only darkness and the ocean of stars. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin was calm. Passengers were asleep, a few reading under dim overhead lights. The flight attendants whispered in the galley, preparing for their late-night service. Then came a slight bump. Nothing unusual at first, just turbulence. Emily's eyes opened briefly. Her instincts were sharp even now. Once a pilot, always a pilot. She checked the seatbelt sign and leaned back again. Then the bump became a jolt. The plane shuddered, just enough for cups to rattle and a few people to gasp awake. A woman across the aisle clutched her husband's arm. Just turbulence, he whispered, though his knuckles were white. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. Emily frowned. The captain's voice sounded composed, but tight, forced. She'd heard that tone before. Someone masking real concern. A few minutes passed. The turbulence didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. The plane lurched sharply to one side. A drink cart slid down the aisle and slammed into a seat. Screams erupted. Emily's body reacted before her mind did. Her hands gripped the armrests, her eyes scanning the plane like she was back in a cockpit. She could sense it. Something wasn't right. Then came the announcement that changed everything. If there's a licensed pilot on board, the intercom blared, please press your call button immediately. The cabin froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then people began murmuring, confused, frightened. Did he just say a pilot? Someone whispered. Emily's heart pounded. Her thumb hovered over the call button. This can't be happening, she thought. Not again. But years of training, of discipline, overrode hesitation. She pressed the button. Within seconds, a flight attendant appeared, a young woman with wide, terrified eyes and trembling hands. Her name tag read Sandra. You pressed the call light. Sandra asked breathlessly. Do you have flight experience? Yes, Emily said, steadying her voice. I'm Drive, Emily Carter, former Air Force pilot. What's going on? Sandra swallowed hard. The captain, he's collapsed. The co-pilot says he can't land the plane alone. He's asking for help. Emily stood instantly. Take me to the cockpit. Sandra blinked, surprised by the authority in Emily's tone, then nodded and led her down the aisle. Passengers watched as she passed, whispers following her. She's a pilot. Oh my God, is something wrong with the plane? One man grabbed her sleeve. You can fly this thing, right? Emily met his panicked eyes. I'll do everything I can. The cabin tilted slightly as another jolt rippled through it. Overhead bins popped open, luggage spilling out. Someone screamed. The plane steadied, but fear had already spread like fire. Sandra pushed open the cockpit door, and Emily stepped inside. The sight was chaos. The captain was slumped in his seat, unconscious, his headset askew and oxygen mask hanging uselessly by his side. The co-pilot, a man barely 30, was drenched in sweat, his hands gripping the controls as alarms flashed red and yellow across the instrument panel. He turned, startled to see a civilian enter. Who are you? He demanded. Doctor Emily Carter, she said quickly. Former Air Force pilot. Sandra said you needed help. He hesitated only a second before nodding. Hydraulic pressures dropping. I can keep us steady, but landing, he shook his head. Landing this thing solo. Impossible. Emily slid into the captain's seat, every nerve alive. Not impossible, she said. Just difficult. Her fingers moved across the console instinctively, checking pressure, altitude, engine status. It was like her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Okay, she murmured, half to herself. Autopilot is compensating, but we've got instability on the left side. You've been losing hydraulic fluid for how long? About 10 minutes, the co-pilot said. And it's getting worse. Emily nodded sharply. All right, we'll stabilize first. Then I'll contact ATC. She toggled the radio. This is Flight 602, co-pilot incapacitated, emergency control assumed by secondary pilot, Emily Carter. Requesting emergency procedures. Static. Then a distant voice. Flight 602, copy. Confirm captain's condition. Emily glanced at the unmoving man beside her. Unconscious but breathing. Medical emergency. Prepare for emergency landing instructions. The co-pilot's breathing slowed, his eyes darting to her. You really know what you're doing. Emily gave a tight smile. I used to fly F-16s. I'll manage your 737. She adjusted altitude manually, hands steady on the yoke. Slowly, the plane leveled. The turbulence lessened. In the cabin, passengers noticed the sudden calm. The baby stopped crying. People dared to breathe again. Sandra peeked into the cockpit, her voice trembling. The passengers, they're asking if we're going to crash. Emily didn't look up. Tell them the plane's in good hands. Sandra's eyes welled up, but she nodded and left. Emily's focus never wavered. All right, she said to the co-pilot. What's our fuel? Plenty. But if hydraulics fail completely, we'll lose rudder control on descent. Emily's stomach tightened. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. She rerouted pressure through secondary valves, her hands flying across the switches with confidence born from years of experience. Outside, the stars glimmered like pinpricks through the windshield. The co-pilot finally spoke, voice hushed. Why'd you stop flying? Emily didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. Because the last time I flew, she said quietly, someone didn't make it home. The co-pilot nodded, understanding without asking more. For a moment, there was silence except for the steady hum of the engines. Then, without warning, the control panel flickered again. A new alarm blared, a sharp, angry sound that made both their stomachs drop. Emily read the code flashing red. Hydraulic failure escalating, the co-pilot said in disbelief. We're losing rudder control. Emily's heart sank. If we lose that, we can't steer properly during descent. He turned to her. Can we still land? Emily stared straight ahead, her reflection ghostly in the glass, the night stretching endlessly before them. We'll have one shot, she said softly. And if we miss it, there won't be another. Inside the cockpit, red warning lights flickered like angry eyes, casting the cramped space in a pulse of color and tension. Emily Carter's hands were steady on the yoke, her mind calculating, predicting, fighting against panic. The co-pilot beside her, Mark Evans, looked one breath away from braking, but her calm steadied him. Hydraulic systems are at 20%, Mark said through clenched teeth. Left ailerons almost gone. Emily nodded, her gaze sharp. We'll reroute through the auxiliary pump. Give me backup pressure on the right. If that fails, we'll use manual control. Manual, on descent, he said, incredulous. She met his eyes. It's ugly, but it's possible. Outside, lightning flashed in the distance, white against the darkness, illuminating thick clouds ahead. The storm they'd tried to avoid was catching up to them. Emily flipped the radio switch. Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 602 to New York Center. Captain incapacitated, co-pilot and substitute pilot in control. Requesting emergency landing clearance. Repeat, emergency landing. Static filled the cockpit before a voice broke through, firm but tense. Flight 602, this is New York Center. Confirm identity of substitute pilot. Lieutenant Emily Carter, United States Air Force, retired, she replied crisply. We've got 162 passengers and crew on board. Estimated fuel for 50 minutes. We're requesting immediate descent and priority runway. Roger that, Lieutenant. You're cleared to land on runway 22L at JFK. Emergency response is standing by. Emily exhaled, a flicker of relief, but no time for it. She adjusted altitude, engaging partial autopilot. Mark wiped his brow. Runway 22L. Got it. What's your plan? Manual override. We'll bring her in like we did the old birds. Hand on throttle, eyes on horizon, pray hydraulics hold. He gave a nervous chuckle that wasn't really laughter. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said, voice flat. Dash dash dash. In the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with fear. Mothers whispered prayers. Men gripped armrests, knuckles pale. Flight attendants moved with quiet urgency, checking seatbelts, offering reassurances they barely believed. Sandra, the attendant who had fetched Emily, stood near the front, eyes fixed on the closed cockpit door. Her earpiece crackled. Crew to positions, came the co-pilot's strained voice. Prepare passengers for emergency landing. Her throat tightened. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, voice trembling through the intercom, please listen carefully. We are making an emergency landing. Fasten your seatbelts, place your heads between your knees, and follow crew instructions. A chorus of frightened murmurs rippled through the cabin. A little girl in row 12 clutched her mother's hand. Mommy, she whispered, is the lady in the front flying the plane? Her mother squeezed her tight. Yes, sweetheart, she's going to get us home. Dash dash dash. Back in the cockpit, the city lights of New York began to appear, tiny jewels through a haze of clouds. Emily's breathing slowed as she shifted focus to the landing approach. All right, Mark. Flaps at 20 degrees. Flaps 20. Speed to 180 knots. 180 set. The engines roared lower, vibrating through the cabin. Rain began to streak across the windshield, each drop catching the runway lights in brief glints of silver. Okay, she said, we're coming in hot, but we'll keep her stable. Mark looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. You've done this before, haven't you? She smirked faintly. Not in a commercial jet full of sleeping passengers. But close enough. The radio crackled again. Flight 602, winds 220 at 15 knots. You are clear for emergency landing. Copy. Tower, Emily replied. Let's make this count. She reached for the control column, muscles taut. Every vibration of the aircraft, every sound, felt magnified. Flaps at 30, she said. 30, Mark confirmed. Speed to 150. Done. The runway lights grew larger, stretching ahead like a glowing path in the darkness. But the crosswind was strong, too strong. The plane started to drift left. Rudders not responding fully, Mark said urgently. We're veering. I see it, Emily snapped. Counterbalance manually. She fought the controls, every muscle straining. The yoke felt heavy, sluggish under her hands. Sweat dripped down her temple as she corrected their angle. The wheels were seconds from touching down. Hold steady. The plane slammed onto the runway with a thunderous jolt. Passengers screamed as the cabin shook violently. The landing gear squealed, rubber burning against asphalt. Speed brakes, Emily shouted. Deployed. Reverse thrust. Engaged. Sparks flew outside as metal scraped. The aircraft shuddered, fishtail-edged slightly, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed they'd lose control. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing the yoke straight. Come on. Come on. Finally, with a long screech, the plane slowed, then stopped. Silence. Only the hiss of the cooling engines filled the air. Emily's hands trembled as she released the yoke. The cockpit was dim, filled with the sound of both pilots breathing hard. Mark broke first, laughing weakly. You did it. My God, you actually did it. Emily leaned back, exhausted. We did it. Dash dash dash. A few seconds later, the intercom light blinked. Sandra's voice came through, choked with emotion. Cabin secure. Passengers safe. We made it. Outside, flashing red and blue lights raced toward the aircraft, emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances. The plane was surrounded in moments. Emily and Mark watched as medics boarded to attend to the unconscious captain. One of them turned to Emily. You the one who landed this? She nodded numbly. Then you just saved 162 lives, he said quietly. Emily looked down at her hands, still shaking, still smelling faintly of metal and fear. Guess I did. Dash dash dash. Half an hour later, the passengers were escorted off the plane. The air outside was cold, rain tapping gently against the tarmac. Some people cried as they stepped down the stairs, others paused just to look back at the aircraft that had nearly become their tomb. When Emily finally emerged, the crowd erupted into applause. Reporters had already gathered near the terminal fence, cameras flashing, shouting questions. But Emily didn't care about attention. Her eyes were on the small girl from row 12, standing with her mother under a blanket. The girl broke free and ran up to her, clutching a napkin scribbled with crayons. On it was a drawing of a plane, and a stick-figure woman with big wings. "You saved us," the girl said softly. Emily knelt, her voice breaking. "No, sweetheart," she said, smiling through tears. "We saved each other." The girl hugged her tightly, and for the first time in years, Emily felt something she hadn't since the Air Force: peace. The next morning, headlines across the country told the story. Retired Air Force pilot lands passenger jet after captain's collapse. Hero in row 12. How one woman saved 162 lives. But Emily didn't read them. She sat quietly in her hotel room, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise through the window. Flying had always been her greatest fear and her greatest love. She'd spent years running from it, buried in blueprints and office lights, convincing herself she was done. But when the captain's voice had asked, "Is there a pilot on board?" something deep inside her had answered. That night in the sky had reminded her who she truly was. Not just an engineer, not just a survivor, a pilot. And though she didn't know when, she knew one day she'd fly again.